is an honour to announce this year's budget.
It's 2.5 months since Finance Minister Nicola Willis delivered her first full budget.
Hard-working New Zealanders will get to keep more of their own money through our government's tax relief.
As promised, tax relief has been delivered. Inflation is heading the right way, but it's still tough. Thousands of public service jobs gone, businesses struggling, and with GDP flatlining, New Zealand is just keeping its nose out of recession. So when will the better times arrive? Welcome to NBR's Back in Business podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. In this episode, we talk with Nicola Willis about public service cuts, what's happening with the Cook Strait ferries, and will she sell off Kiwibank? But first, at a recent invite-only NZ Private Capital event, members pointed out that the Finance Minister said this in her budget speech.
Almost all the challenges New Zealand faces will be made easier if the economy grows faster.
They asked her what she's doing to get businesses growing, and so did we. All right, Nicola Willis, welcome to the Back in Business podcast. Look, you've just been talking to the private capital crowd. When they asked you what your plan for growth is, what did you tell them?
Well, the first thing you've got to do is get the basics right, and we've been on a mission to get inflation out of the economy and do our bit there. Good progress. We're down to 3.3 and the track's looking good. We have re-established discipline to government spending, and that's positive because it creates a context in which interest rates can drop, and we're very conscious that OCR drop is going to breathe life into the economy. So then we ask ourselves, what are the things that the government can affect which will give businesses more confidence to invest, to grow, to employ people, to make things, to innovate, to venture into new markets? We're looking at 5 big themes. And those themes are broadly education and skills. If you don't educate your people, you're not going to be more productive, and we've got a lot of work to do there. We're looking at the regulatory environment. We are convinced that we have made it too hard for too many businesses and employers. Third, we're looking at infrastructure. We have an infrastructure deficit, and that is getting in the way of productivity. Fourth, we're very focused on overseas investment and trade, access to capital. Really critical.
So that's bringing in foreign capital. That's what you're talking about there.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure that firms can make use of it. And then finally, science and innovation and technology, and ensuring that the government-funded system is working in tip-top shape, but also that firms face good incentives.
Okay, so we'll talk about technology in a sec. I mean, I think your budget was pretty broad and pretty populist. I mean, you had the tax relief in there costing $14 billion, and you had the sort of the business landlord tax relief there, which also costs. But there wasn't anything particular for business, was there? It's all broad. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it starts with how you view government's role when it comes to growth. And if you think that the only lever that the government has is the spending lever, then you wouldn't say that we spent a lot on growth. But our view as a government is actually one of the best things that you can do is use your regulatory lever and use your performance lever when it comes to the management of your own investments. So we think actually regulating better, having more opportunities for the private sector to invest in infrastructure, making sure that the consenting regime is better, those things will be fundamental for business growth.
So that's your answer for the fact that we've got GDP, which is flatlining, unemployment 4.6 going towards 5, people working more, less hours, those kinds of things. That's the answer. Those 5, that is your plan.
Well, when I look at the situation we're in right now, I would say that the major thing that has worsened the situation is that we had 3 years of very high inflation with the government pouring fuel on the inflation fire, and that is significant because in the budget we did have a choice and we could have chosen to keep that spending track up. We were advised that if we stuck to the plans of the outgoing government, we would be in deficit until at least 2030. We would be building up debt. We would be continuing to fuel what had become a very unbalanced economy. So I just wouldn't underestimate the importance of getting that macro fundamental right.
All right. You talked about technology before. I would say the technology sector wasn't that impressed with the budget, though, because you did scrap things like the industry transformation plans and those kinds of things. And this is a really big export sector. How do you answer that?
It's a really critical sector.
Yeah.
And if you talk to someone who is running a technology business who's got, let's say, a software as a service business that they want to take from a small firm to a growing firm, they're not going to say to you, what I really need is the Ministry for Business Innovation and Employment to generate another plan with a strategy and a glossy cover and 5 pages of ministerial photos. That's not going to help. What they're going to say to you that they need is probably a few things. One, they need to have a regime that does give them access to capital when they decide to go to that next stage, and we're thinking very hard about how we can support them. They're probably going to say, look, having a government science and innovation system that is easy to engage with, that is responsive, is pretty helpful, and many of them would say they haven't had that in recent times. They're also going to say, look, when I actually want to move into a new building or I want to try something new, let's say they want to do something in genetic science, for example, I want a regulatory regime that lets me do it without it being a nightmare. So all of those things we're focused on. We don't think spending is our only lever.
Have you got rid of the ecosystem that was being developed, though, and the community that allowed these people to already try these kinds of things?
No, I don't think so. We're very supportive of the tech community. We continue to provide funding to Callaghan. We continue to provide funding to Crown Research Institutes.
But you have cut some science funding as well.
Well, we have, for example, said no to some of the half-baked plans of the last government, but we continue to see that government has a really important role in investing in science and technology and innovation.
All right, and just finally on business, is there any room, should the economy improve, and business obviously in the country hopes that it does, for tax relief, targeted tax relief for companies?
Well, we obviously have a position where we need to get debt down, we need to get the books back in balance. So in that context, that doesn't mean we can't do anything to improve the tax system, because there are tax revenue neutral things that we can always be doing to improve the responsiveness of the tax system at the edges.
At the edges. But there's no wholesale idea to, say, cut company tax next term.
Well, I'm obviously focused on the commitments we made at the last election and delivering on them before I make the next set of commitments. And at this stage, we've delivered our big bang tax relief. We're really focused on getting those books back in balance. But I'm really conscious of the fact that when firms talk to me, they do often point out little tax issues at the margin that could make a big difference. And we do have our minds open to that.
National came into power asking for government departments to find savings of between 6.5% and 7.5%. The public service, they said, was bloated.
Well, my heart goes out to anyone who loses their job in any circumstances, but no government can live beyond its means indefinitely.
As a result, the Public Service Association says 6,000 jobs have gone, and there have been 240 savings initiatives outlined in Budget 24. Is that it, or is there more to come? At the recent National Party conference, you said that through savings and reprioritisations, you have found $23 billion over the next 4 years. Does that mean that the cuts are over?
We are in a process where extracting more value from the money we already spend is continuous. That doesn't end. And that is, I completely accept, a very different culture and approach than has been the case for the past 6 years, where budgets were viewed as layer cakes. You take everything that's there, you add another layer of money, you do another lolly scramble, see where the extra cash lands. It's not like that anymore.
But,
we're in
so
a situation
saying,
where we start this way. We say, okay, let's take, for example, the example of education. Where are you currently investing? Is it having the impact for kids that it's meant to? If it's not, how could you tune up that investment to deliver more?
I see you're trying to get value for money, but the actual cuts that you implemented where you say save 6.5%, save 7.5%, are you going to do that again? Are you going to set something like that and say, you guys sort it out?
No, we've got a different starting point for this budget. What we've said for this budget is first thing you have to do is stick to your current baseline. And that's important because many agencies will face pay rounds, they'll face new cost pressures, new things they have to do. And our message to them is don't come to the Finance Minister and say, I need some more money. First look within your own spending that you currently do and work out what you're going to reprioritise to meet those new costs. And the second thing we've done is we've said to every government agency, run yourself just like every small business does, actually most households, do a performance plan, what are you working to do? How are you funding it?
Can
what
they do
trade-offs
that?
are
Can
required?
social agencies run themselves like a small business?
They can put on paper a plan. They can be clear about where their resources are going. They can be clear about what outcomes they're getting. And actually, you know what? Don't underestimate public servants. They want to demonstrate value for money too.
So when teachers, nurses, police have their next pay round, their next negotiations, you're saying, don't come to me for any more money than I've already allocated. That's it. It's concrete.
Well, in the case of the police, of course, we've already funded a major settlement for them.
But,
and so
there's always future. This is next year. What is it? It's just like, don't forget about it.
Well, in the case of
knocking.
education and health and law and order, we've identified that those are 3 areas that will always be priorities for new investment. Yeah. But what we're also signalling really carefully is we are in a time of moderation and restraint. So we do have to be conscious that our ability to offer massive pay rises is not what it once was.
Massive pay rises.
We're not in that.
Are you
we're not
saying
gonna
that
be
they
in
have
that
had massive
position.
pay rises?
Well, we've had massive inflation. And so in order for pay rises to be meaningful, the government has been in a position where the pay rises have in percentage terms had to be bigger than they were in the past. We've said, let's start with getting that basic right of getting inflation under control.
Do you think the teachers and the nurses and the police officers believe that they've had massive pay
No,
rises?
I don't think they have. I don't think that they would characterise it that way. But what I'm saying is if inflation is out of control, then you have to give a big percentage of a pay rise. And actually, in real terms, it's not worth as much. So our point has been get that inflation position under control, and then any pay rise you give is more meaningful.
So you're setting that expectation right now.
Yeah.
Are you also setting the possibility that that's going to drive more people overseas to find higher wages because there's no more money in the kitty?
Well, no, because our starting position is that we want to grow this economy more strongly so that we do have better opportunities available. And we don't want it to only be a case where if you're looking for opportunity in a well-paid job, you look for a public sector role. We want that to be available in the private sector too. And in the public sector, we want our frontline workers to be well and fairly remunerated. But we are also a country that has to live within its means. And I, like every finance minister before me, I'm sure, would love to be able to say, let's double the pay for the teachers and the nurses. But every New Zealander knows we can't afford that. So we have to live within our budgets.
Would you acknowledge that's a possibility, that if you're setting that baseline now and that expectation now ahead of any future pay negotiations, people will say, I'm just not going to bother. I'll go where the money is.
Well, I'd just say to them, the grass isn't always greener. I look at Australia right now. They've just had their inflation rate go up again. Right. They're in a position where their inflation is higher than it is in New Zealand. In fact, some commentators in Australia are talking about lifting their interest rates over there again. Well, you won't be surprised to hear that I reckon the best place to be, best place to be a teacher or a nurse is New Zealand. And I realise that others will have a debate with us about that, but we back New Zealand.
Crossing the ditch might just be easier than crossing the Cook Strait. KiwiRail's Cook Strait ferries are ageing and have recently been plagued by delays, a grounding and a collision with a wharf. But the $3 billion replacement cost of 2 new ferries and terminals was just too rich for the Finance Minister to stomach.
The Ferrari is not the only car in the garage. I think it's time we had a look and see if there's a Toyota Corolla, good reliable one, that might be able to do the job, or maybe some second-hand Teslas.
I think she should stand down with making such a big call without having a lot of debate.
You favour a reliable Corolla-style ferry. Have you sourced them yet?
We have had advice from our ministerial advisory group that makes clear that we can get good ferries. But I just want to unpick something in your question, which is quite important, I think, for New Zealanders' understanding of this issue, which is this isn't just about the ships. Because if it were just about the ships, then the last project might have been okay. Because actually, the massive blowout that occurred, the $3 billion project, the ships were only 20% of the cost. Where the blowout happened was that they didn't think through what infrastructure would be required for really big new ships with rail on them. And so what you had was a situation where the last government committed to the car without working out the car was too big for the garage. Then they went to design the new garage and went, whoa, that's more expensive than the car. And that was actually the problem. So we've started from the position of saying, look at the project as a whole, work out how you can get more value.
But do those costs actually go away?
Yes,
do they really? I mean,
yeah.
if you bring down the size of the ferries, you're still going to have to do some work, some geotechnical work, earthquake-proof, sea level rises, all those kinds of things. Don't those terminals have to be upgraded? That cost is still there.
Certainly not at all to the extent that was necessary with the other proposal. And one of the things that can make a significant difference, and I visited both the Port of Marlborough and Centreport and talked this through with them, is that if your starting position, as it was with the failed project, if your starting position is you have to have rail going straight onto the ship, that drives massive logistical complexity in terms of the infrastructure that you need. Whereas, if you say you want to have the rail go to the yard and then have the containers put onto the ferry, that vastly reduces the cost and complexity of the infrastructure builds. Because you can basically, Simon, use existing facilities.
Can you tell us just quickly what the break cost will be for the IREX ferries?
No, I cannot, because that's subject to a commercial negotiation and it hasn't been determined.
Annual results reporting season is about to kick off, and it's highly likely the big four Aussie-owned banks will be dropping some big profit numbers. And then there's the taxpayer-owned Kiwibank, the fifth largest, but with a market share of just 5%. And Nicola Willis wants it to grow. But what does that look like? Kiwibank. You want it to be a genuine competitor, a fifth bank. Isn't the answer just to publicly list it?
Look, I don't think so. The way that I come at this issue is, first, I want to have competitive banking services for New Zealanders. The Draft Commerce Commission report inquiring into the state of competition in New Zealand banking suggests there's some pretty big problems there. I agree with the Commerce Commission's draft finding that actually we need more disruption of that pretty cosy oligopoly. We need more mavericks, and the Commerce Commission identified that could be Kiwibank. Now, what does Kiwibank need to be that disruptor? Well, the first thing they need to do is get their own tech transformation completed, and they've got that underway at the moment. The second thing, if they want to go to the next level, is to have some more external capital come in. Now, that need not be through, for example, a listing. It could actually be through institutional investors such as KiwiSaver funds, the super fund, ACC.
But does that would change the ownership model of Kiwibank if you took that, say, outside of the ACC or the super fund? If you took it privately,
it wouldn't, because the last government, when they established Kiwibank's current structure, intentionally established it as what's called a Schedule 4 Crown entity, and a Schedule 4 entity is deliberately structured such that it can take on external capital. It's different from a state-owned enterprise, and that was intentional, I think, because even the last government, with whom I have some philosophical differences, could see there could be a future for Kiwibank in which it required external capital.
Okay, so external capital. What about a mixed ownership model like we have with the power companies?
Well, I think, as I say, look, one step at a time. First step, the current technological transformation. Next step, I'm taking advice on what would be required to make it an attractive institution for external capital to invest in. And then down the line, would those external investors say that they would want as a requirement of investing the opportunity to list their stake? Let's work through all of those questions.
What's the time frame for that?
Well, I'm seeking advice at the moment, and I hope following the final Commerce Commission report, which comes at the end of this month, that the government will be in a position some time after that to talk about how we're responding. And one of the areas of response is Kiwibank, but there will be other areas of response too. I mean, I want to be really clear about this. We are a government that is very serious about the problems with banking competition in this country.
Will there be a formal review of Kiwibank after that report?
I've already sought advice on what it would take to grow Kiwibank, and so I expect to get that advice in the next few weeks.
To wrap up this podcast, we have one more topic for the Minister, a topic which is largely out of her hands: interest rates. Tomorrow is the hotly anticipated Reserve Bank decision on the OCR and its monetary policy statement. Whether there's a cut or not tomorrow, the consensus is forming that the OCR will come down sooner now. Good news for businesses and homeowners, and politically for the government. You say you see green shoots in the economy, so can you give me your forecast for the rest of the year?
Look, my forecast for the rest of the year will be that we continue to see inflation falling away and that it will come back into target. And I base that view on the forecasts that are provided to me by the Treasury. That's a big thing. Getting inflation out of the economy is going to make a big difference. The forecasts that I've received from Treasury, because I'm always very conscious here, Simon, not to be seen to be trying to influence the Reserve Bank, but the forecasts that I received tell us that means that interest rates will drop. You know, you've already seen the market price in pretty significant cuts to interest rates, and I think that trend can continue. I think with interest rates dropping, we'll see that breathe air into the economy, and we will see recovery starting to happen.
Politically, that's fortunate timing for you, but really, how much influence have you had over this if we do get a turnaround?
Well, you know, first do no harm. And I think that if we had done a really big spending, irresponsible budget like New Zealand's got used to in the past few years, that would have been really dangerous. So we didn't do that. And the second thing that I think that, you know, we should take credit for is that we have made it clear to the Reserve Bank that it has that mandate of eliminating inflation. It's on that mission. And we are a government that is openly pro-development, pro-growth, anti-red tape on the side of economic growth.
Are you pro-business?
Absolutely.
So a lot of New Zealand businesses have been hanging in there.
They have been.
What's your message to them?
My message to them is you are tough, you are resilient, you have come through some really hard stuff. COVID, inflation spikes, high interest rates. Just hang on. This country is still an amazing place to do business. We get it. It's tough. We're on your side. You'll make it through. Better days ahead.
Finance Minister Nicola Willis, thank you for joining Back in Business.
Great to be on the show.
And that's it for this episode of NBR's Back in Business podcast. Links to all the audio clips used are listed in the description. For more comprehensive business coverage, you can subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Thanks to Creative Director Michael Hitmott and Content Producer Joseph Hisayasu. The Back in Business podcast will be back on Thursday when we dissect the Reserve Bank's latest OCR decision. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.